Good morning and welcome to our today's webinar about IP in China and what to expect in 2022. So short introduction from my side. My name is Sophia Fuchs and I am senior consultant with CHINABRAND IP Consulting, and I am responsible for IP project as well as projects regarding competitive intelligence in China. So let's jump right in. Just recently, in September of this year, there was a very big excitement in the IP scene due to this one article that said China is going on an IP offensive. This content was discussed very much in the scene, and we just think that the statement is not correct. China is not attacking and is not going an IP offensive because they just surround and occupy the territory. So they always go about indirectly. And the background and the trigger of this article were these numbers. So here you can see the development between 2018 and 2019 in the civil IP cases. So the most important number here is that there is nearly a 30% rise in the patent infringement cases. The whole IP ecosystem is growing in China. Here you can see this pretty well. There is the development of the IPR cases in the recent 12 years, and especially starting from 2016, the number of new first instance civil IPR cases rose dramatically. The only thing is between 2019 and 20, this trend was just broken by the COVID effect, but without the Corona effect, the curve would have been continuing to rise unbroken, and we also think and expect that in the next 1, 2, or 3 years, the trend will just remain steadily. So due to these growing ecosystem, the growing numbers and the whole field of IPR cases, we can clearly say that there is no Chinese IP offensive, but we or Western companies are facing headwinds. So we are getting more defensive in China in the area of IP, but in our opinion, the companies in Western countries are very well prepared. So we just noticed this from our clients that the business in China is becoming more and more challenging. Most of them are investing even more than the years before, even though it is super challenging to remain in the market, to stay compliant with all the new rules. So in general, the business is becoming more challenging. And we also see this in the infringement in the recent year, the developments. Like in earlier times, we had pretty simple copies, pretty simple patent infringements, but that time is over. So now we are facing software infringement, like copyright of website and so on. So the counterfeiters are not only becoming even more clever, they are fighting back. And this is not a new trend, but the trend is increasing and is also connected to the rising high numbers of the Chinese IP. And we think that China is a big heavy tanker and they will not get it slowed down. So the companies working there, the Western companies operating there, need to change the course and think about their strategy in this area. Besides, working in the IP field, IP enforcement will also continue, but become even more intense. First, in terms of quantity, but also in terms of quality. Besides, as you all know, the Chinese society in terms of digitalization is super fast, much better developed than the companies are here in Europe, just in regard of digitalization, AI. And also this is a point in the Chinese IP ecosystem. So as China is very advanced in digital manners, there are some examples where we can learn. So let's look at this point from a different perspective. There is political instrumentalization of IP, and also in the scope of decoupling, strengthening the domestic economy and enforcing Chinese standards. And all those things have a very high influence on the Chinese IP ecosystem. To sum up this point, the government is getting more and more involved, also like in private IP proceedings. This perspective might be a little bit challenging for Western companies, but in general, China needs the Western companies. They need the employers, the clients, the know-how, the quality. So there's a point that Western companies can only stay in China in the medium term if they really deliver something that China really needs and wants. It is much easier for companies that are working in the businesses, in the fields which are highly supported by the Chinese government, just for example, the 5G area or AI. And the IP is being expanded across the board. So it's not a direct attack of Chinese IP companies. So we can see that China is on a very good way to become the world's IP powerhouse. And Western companies have to take this into account when they go into further strategic planning. So it's not just a trend between 2016 and 2021. There will be, of course, further mass patent application in China and also abroad. Like if you take the numbers of patent or trademark applications of Chinese companies in other countries, this is mind-blowing. So this flood of patents will increase, and the workload for companies and examiners in the patent office will increase. And besides, there is a trend that the Chinese state is also strengthening the national trademarks through financial support. So it is difficult if like this is so healthy for natural competition, but Western companies have to deal with it, find good solutions, how to place themselves, and therefore it's so much important for the next months and years that Western companies really strengthen their brand and try to have the best position in the Chinese market as possible, and maybe also think about repositioning their brand in China. Here you can see the Western chess game compared with the Chinese Wei-Qi strategy. So it's just a very big difference in the thinking, just due to cultural manners. So in the Western companies, the managers go the very straight, strategic, logical thinking way. So they just go linear and think, if I do A, what will be the effect? Then there will be B. Chinese managers, the companies, they have a very different kind of thinking. So it's not just going forward with the strategy. It's more like going indirect and have a more comprehensive focus. So they're like building a circle. And if a territory is circled up, the point or the other company, the market is filled, and then you lose, you're out of the game. So there's a very different thinking, and this has to be considered in planning the long-term strategy for the Chinese market. Basically, these two different strategic approaches are found everywhere in the economy, and many Western managers have great problems understanding these two very different strategies. This is just because of the very big cultural difference. And this is what it makes so complex and challenging, but also exciting at the same time, that this game will also continue even more intense in the next year. And if we compare the IP ecosystem with these games, it is very clear that China will set much more stones, apply for even more patents, register even more trademarks, and conduct even more lawsuits. So you can see here that a lot has happened in the last 3 years, but especially the whole IP ecosystem has been qualified and is more sophisticated. IP is developing very quickly in the field of IT. So we have, on the one hand, IP, but we have IP data, and we have the cybersecurity law, which came already into force in 2017, but it's just in the level of enforcement. So enforcement started in 2020, 2021. And besides, we can also add the personal information protection law, and this is where the music plays now. So there is a transformation of IP to IT, as IP is being digitally mapped in IT. Here you can see the traditional IP areas, like nothing new, patent, trademark, designs, copyright domain, and like the soft IP of trade secrets. And we say that IP data is the future. Like the IP data is connected with all of those, with the patents, with the designs. And there's a clear trend. Most of our new cases are also related to IT. Here you can see an overview of our IP data mapping lists we use in our project. So in the dynamic technology fields, the IP data or IP relevant data is becoming much more important. So for example, we work a lot with IP metadata, which shows up in data mapping. So IT projects usually start with the data mapping because many companies usually do not know what data they are using for, where the data is stored, and how the data should be evaluated. Many companies just have a very rough overview about their data, but in the future, like data will be the key. Also regarding the transformation together with IP. So it doesn't matter if the data is analog or digital, it is transferred across the border, for example, from the Chinese branch to the European headquarters. And in these cases, to answer all those questions, we work with about 100 categories of IP metadata. And this is a part of the basic equipment. The whole thing goes even further when we then follow the data flows. We are going so far as to take data in the landscape of IP. We can own data, but it's not legally our property. We can use the term kind of a soft IP. So that is data a kind of intellectual property, because without the data or the rights, it will be very hard to protect the IP of a company in this very, very fast moving technologies. So therefore, our recommendation is please pay much more attention to IP data and IP relevant data in the upcoming year. Not only in regard with intellectual property, cybersecurity and data protection are the hot topics of this year, and they also will be the hot topics of the next year. So most important is the cybersecurity law, and in this scope, there is the enforcement. The first step is the enforcement of the multi-level protection scheme. And this is relevant for all companies operating in China. And they need to do an evaluation, a classification in order to get the security certificate. So in this scope, also with the data security law, which is regulating cross-border data transfer, and also personal information protection law, which just came into force a few weeks ago. It's kind of the Chinese GDPR. Also, the new laws make really clear what the most relevant trend of the next years in China will be. So it's all about data, and in our concern, it's all about data and IP data. The IP infrastructure is getting better and better. We have 4 IP courts, 3 internet courts, 20 IP tribunals, and 44 IP service centers, and there is a growing tendency for the next years. And the picture here shows an online trail, and this is what the Chinese online IP courts could look like. And also these online courts had got like really boosted in the last 2 years due to COVID-19. Other possible courts are like that the judge is supported by AI in the sense that the AI is trained with masses of IP cases of the recent years. They identify the patterns and make the final decisions, but this is just applicable for comparably simple cases. Another example is the mobile court on WeChat, which is a very simple program where you can conduct by simple proceedings the digital court in China on WeChat. For example, there is biometric login by the eyes. You can upload or download documents, check for other comparable cases, and it's just like in the real court proceedings, but in small and fast and easy. So here at CHINABRAND, we use innovative high-performance search tools as the semantic pattern search tools. They are really not longer efficient in the efficiency process because of the masses of the IP rights. Just of the beginning of the session, I showed you the numbers of the IP floods from China. So this makes clear that there is a very, very strong need for intelligent tools that help and that might even work much, much better than our colleagues doing it by hand. Like also in our work, this is highly relevant then because AI tools in Chinese language, they can identify which keywords are the most relevant. And also by keywords, we can conduct an image search. For example, we can use by Chinese keywords and finding by something like Baidu Maps, the shop. So it's going like a reverse investigation just using intelligent tools. So there are so many ways which we will also increase to use in the next years. And without those, the IP enforcement is hardly possible anymore. Another point is that we can, for example, just schedule if the machine is finding something, they will do the directly automatic timestamp notarization in order to preserve evidence for further proceedings without the person checking it, because like the internet is changing very rapidly. So if the tool or the machine is finding something, they will do the notarization on time directly. Also, another example is the AI prior art or FTO searches. Because of these growing and growing numbers of patents and designs, it's nearly impossible that the patent attorneys that they can make the 100% perfect patent search. And this is where AI tools are doing the best work, also in Chinese language, to check the situation, and they connect also picture data with data in already published documents. So they are really crawling the whole websites, and this takes several hours, but the results are incredibly good. So let's move on to the law enforcement, which luckily improved a lot in recent years. So there are so many options, from freezing the assets and going with the authorities, writing warning letters. So in the past, it was often very difficult to take actions against the infringers before the authorities and in court. And the reason were just the local protectionism and the corruption, but today this is not longer the case. So the enforcement of IP in China works very well today. And this is also a point that this is very favorable for Western companies. The whole systems in China are getting more and more connected and interrelated. So there is a connection between IP and IT due to the IP data. But on the other hand, you have all heard about the corporate social credit system. There is also a point about the IP infringement. And now it is becoming more and more relevant and a trend that companies are blacklisted in the corporate social credit system due to IP violations, which is also a very good way for Western companies to do IP enforcement. So also the corporate social credit system and the interrelation between all the authorities will be more and more relevant and more strengthened in the next years. So it is really clear that China is in a process of transformation, and due to this, we highly recommend the companies to conduct an IP self-assessment. The central axis here of the chart are the attractiveness of the owns market segment and the owns IP strength relative to the competition. So the question is how attractive the market still is, and all those are measured by the parameters such as turnover, growth, stability, or the profitability. And the strength of one's own IP is measured by the number, the quality, the stability of existing IP rights in China, and the potential of new IP rights in the highly innovative fields such as AI, 5G. As there's nearly always a big surprise when we do research of new IP rights of Chinese companies in China. And this is exactly why we highly recommend the companies to do such a self-assessment, thinking about strategic decisions, and maybe there is the need for some adjustments for the companies way in China in the next year. For example, if there's a market segment which is relatively attractive, but the company is comparably weak in the competition and is not able to catch up very fast, there are just two options. Option one is to invest massively and to catch up, or option two is to leave the market. And this is a really important point. So it is not very cost effective for the whole company to be somewhere swimming in the middle in the field, and there's too much lost potential. In the long term, the company without any investments in China or the business in China, you will be pushed out of the market. Another relevant point are the critical technology areas. So if companies are active in the critical technology fields that are published of the Chinese government strategic plans, the companies need to be very careful. So of course, on the one hand, there is a high sales potential, but on the other side, there is a very big danger that you are working against the interests of China and will be threatened or slowly forced out of the Chinese market. Because in these cases, in these technologies, the IT compliance relating the personal information protection law, the cybersecurity law, and the data security law are highly relevant. So this is a point where the ice is pretty thin, and the whole strategy for the company in this field in China needs to be really excellent. This brings me to the last slide of today's session, the challenges for foreign brands in China in the next years. So on the one hand, we have the targeted building of Chinese brands by the state, which means that Western companies really need to strengthen their brand in China in the long term in order to not get pushed out of the market. On the other hand, there are the increasing branding of the Chinese OEMs. The space for trademarks for Western companies is very narrowed and will be narrowed down also in the future. So if Western companies think about strengthening their brand in China, they should act quickly because there is no space left. There will be no space left. There is such a fast development. And all in all, there is a clear statement, and it's very clear that in this fragmented, very fast moving and dynamic IP and also data ecosystem, the brand of a company is becoming more and more relevant in China and is kind of the port in the storm. So thank you for your attention. This brings me to the end for now. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to call or to just contact me by mail. We also will send you the presentation later on. Thank you very much for your time. I wish you a great day and bye-bye.